Three police cruisers rolled into the parking lot of Carter's family diner. Just after sunrise, their tires, crunching across the gravel, with enough force to make everyone inside glance toward the front windows. Morning light spilled across the polished counter, while the smell of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and homemade biscuits filled the room. Truck drivers laughed over breakfast. A retired schoolteacher read the local newspaper by the window. A young mother helped her little daughter color on a paper placemat. It looked like any ordinary morning in small-town America, until the front door exploded open. Three uniformed officers stormed inside without greeting anyone. Their heavy boots echoed against the tile floor, as if they owned the building. One officer shoved a table aside, sending coffee cups crashing to the ground. Another swept stacks of clean plates off the serving counter, with one violent motion filling the diner with the sharp sound of breaking glass. The third officer grabbed a wooden chair and hurled it through the dessert display, scattering shattered glass across the fresh pies that had taken hours to bake. The laughter disappeared, conversation stopped in an instant. Only the frightened cries of a little boy clinging to his mother's arm broke the silence. Behind the register stood Naomi Carter, a 62-year-old black woman, wearing a neatly pressed blue apron over a simple white shirt. The silver-streaked hair was tied back, and years of hard work showed in her hands, but her eyes remained calm, steady, and impossible to read. She didn't shout, she didn't panic. She didn't reach for a phone. She simply watched. One of the officers noticed her silence and smirked. He walked closer, his boots crunching over broken plates. "So you're still here," he said with a mocking grin. "Guess you didn't understand the warning." Naomi looked directly into his eyes without saying a word. The officer laughed louder, clearly enjoying the attention. He picked up the tip jar from the counter, turned it upside down, and let hundreds of dollar bills and coins scatter across the floor. Customers instinctively bent down to help gather the money. "Leave it," another officer barked. Nobody moves. Fear settled over the diner like a heavy blanket. Emily, Naomi's young waitress, stood frozen near the coffee machine. She had worked at Carter's diner for less than a year, but Naomi had treated her like family from the first day. Seeing the place destroyed brought tears to her eyes. "Miss Carter," Emily whispered. Naomi raised one gentle hand without looking away from the officers. "It's all right," she said softly. "Stay where you are." There was something unusual about her voice. It wasn't the voice of someone defeated. It carried the quiet confidence of a person who had faced difficult days before and refused to let fear decide her next move. The lead officer noticed an old, framed photograph hanging beside the register. It showed Naomi many years younger, dressed in a police uniform, alongside several officers during a graduation ceremony. He ripped the picture from the wall. "So you used to wear a badge?" He sneered before smashing the frame against the floor. Glass scattered around Naomi's shoes. Several customers gasped. An elderly veteran sitting near the window slowly removed his cap, unable to hide the disappointment on his face. Respect for the badge had always meant something in this town, and watching officers dishonor both a citizen and their own profession felt deeply wrong. Naomi lowered her eyes to the broken photograph. For a brief moment, memories crossed her face. Not anger, not fear, but the weight of years spent serving a community she had once sworn to protect. She had believed a badge represented courage, discipline, and service. Most officers she had worked beside had lived by those values, every single day. What stood before her now was not the standard she remembered. She slowly stepped out from behind the counter. Every movement was measured. Every breath was controlled. The room grew so quiet that the coffee machine was the only sound anyone could hear. The youngest officer folded his arms and laughed. "What are you going to do about it?" Naomi looked around the diner. She had spent nearly 2 decades building after leaving public service. She saw frightened families, shattered memories, broken dishes, and honest people wondering whether anyone would stand up for what was right. Then she looked back at the officers. Her expression never changed. "You still have time," she said calmly. "Pick up what you broke, walk out that door, and let today be remembered as a mistake instead of a tragedy." The officers exchanged amused glances before bursting into laughter, convinced they were standing before nothing more than an aging diner owner who had no power left, completely unaware that the quiet, black woman facing them had once been one of the most respected, tactical veterans the department had ever produced. The shattered coffee mug rolled across the diner floor before finally coming to rest beneath an empty booth. For a long second, nobody moved. The smell of fresh coffee still lingered in the air, mixing with broken glass syrup and silence. Customers stared in disbelief as 3 officers slowly regained their balance, each wearing the same expression, a mixture of shock, anger, and wounded pride. They had walked into Carter's diner, expecting another frightened business owner who would apologize, surrender, and quietly accept humiliation. Instead, they found a woman who had stopped them with calm precision, before they even understood what had happened. Naomi Carter remained exactly where she stood. She wasn't celebrating, she wasn't threatening anyone. She simply adjusted the sleeve of her faded blue shirt beneath the apron and looked at the frightened waitress standing beside the coffee machine. "Emma," she said gently, "take Mrs. Wilson into the kitchen. Make sure she's all right." The elderly customer nodded weakly, while Emma hurried to help her. Even shaken, Naomi's first concern wasn't herself. It was the people who depended on her. Officer Mason finally struggled to his feet, rubbing his wrist where Naomi had redirected his grip. His face burned with embarrassment. He had spent 12 years wearing a badge, yet an older, retired woman had disarmed him without throwing a single reckless punch. "You just assaulted a police officer," he shouted. Naomi looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady enough to quiet the room. "No, officer. I prevented one." Those simple words landed harder than any physical strike. The youngest officer glanced around the diner. Several customers had quietly lifted their phones. Every broken chair, every shattered plate, every careless act of destruction was now being recorded. Moments earlier, they believed their badges guaranteed control. Now the same badges felt heavier than ever. Outside, another patrol vehicle pulled into the parking lot. Its tires stopped with a slow crunch against loose gravel. A 4th officer entered through the front door. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks had nearly 30 years of service behind him. Gray touched the edges of his hair, and experience had taught him to read a room. Before speaking, his eyes first noticed the broken furniture. Then the frightened customers. Then the officers standing awkwardly among the damage they had created. Finally, he looked toward the woman behind the counter. For a brief moment, he simply stared. The years had changed her appearance. Her hair carried silver now, and the diner apron covered the tactical confidence she once wore every day, but her posture hadn't changed. Neither had her eyes. Recognition came all at once. His shoulders stiffened. "Naomi." He spoke her name almost under his breath. Officer Mason turned toward him. "You know her." Lieutenant Brooks didn't answer immediately. Instead, memories returned faster than he expected. 25 years earlier, before promotions, politics, and retirement ceremonies, Naomi Carter had been the lead tactical instructor at Metro Police Academy. Young officers had dreaded her evaluation days because excuses never impressed her. She believed discipline protected lives. She demanded accountability because hesitation cost families their loved ones. She had never raised her voice during training. She never needed to respect followed her because she earned it. Every single day, Brooks remembered watching rookie officers twice her size fail simple exercises because they underestimated her. By the end of every course, those same recruits understood that leadership wasn't measured by noise or intimidation. It was measured by preparation. Courage and restraint back in the diner. The silence grew heavier. Officer Mason frowned. "Sir, she attacked us." Lieutenant Brooks slowly looked across the destroyed dining room. "I see broken tables." He looked toward the shattered pie display. "I see damaged property." His eyes settled on the frightened customers still sitting quietly, and I see civilians who looked terrified. His voice became firmer. "What I don't see," he paused, "is any evidence that this woman started any of it." Nobody answered outside the windows. More people had gathered: neighbors, delivery drivers, parents dropping children off. At school, word traveled quickly, through neighborhoods where people knew each other. Everyone could see the damaged diner. Everyone could also see the woman calmly standing in the middle of it. Naomi slowly bent down and lifted the broken picture frame from the floor. She carefully brushed tiny pieces of glass away with the sleeve of her apron. The photograph inside showed a younger version of herself, standing beside fellow officers after completing a rescue operation years ago. Several faces in that photograph were no longer alive. Others had retired with honor. She quietly placed the damaged frame on the counter. "I spent 22 years protecting this city," she said softly. "I believed every badge represented service before self." Her eyes met each officer one at a time. People trust uniforms because they're supposed to represent integrity. Every time the trust is abused, good officers have to work twice as hard to earn it back. Those words reached far beyond the room. Even customers who had never spoken to Naomi before felt the weight behind them. Lieutenant Brooks lowered his head for a moment. He knew she wasn't speaking out of anger. She was speaking from experience. Officer Mason shifted uneasily, realizing this situation had become far bigger than damaged furniture or wounded pride. Around him, his fellow officers exchanged uncertain glances, each beginning to understand they hadn't simply walked into an ordinary neighborhood diner. That morning, they had walked into the life of a woman whose service had once inspired an entire generation of officers and whose quiet dignity now exposed every mistake they had made. The growing crowd outside Carter's diner fell silent as more patrol vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Neighbors stood beside their cars. Delivery drivers stopped unloading trucks. Parents walking their children to school paused on the sidewalk. Nobody expected to witness a confrontation like this. In the middle of an ordinary American morning, Lieutenant Brooks stepped forward and raised his hand before another officer could enter the diner. "Nobody else comes inside," he ordered firmly. His voice carried the authority of a man who understood that one more bad decision could destroy far more than a building. The younger officers hesitated, looking toward one another before lowering their hands. Naomi Carter remained behind the counter, her calm presence filling the room more than any shouted command ever could. She wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. She wasn't looking for revenge. She simply refused to surrender her dignity. Brooks looked around at the broken tables. Shattered dishes frightened customers, and the officers standing uncomfortably among the damage. "This isn't policing," he said quietly. "This is the opposite of everything this badge is supposed to stand for." His words hung heavily in the room. Officer Mason lowered his eyes. For the first time since walking into the diner, only minutes earlier, he had felt untouchable. Now he couldn't even look at the elderly couple, whose breakfast had been interrupted, or the little boy still holding his mother's hand. With tears in his eyes, Naomi slowly walked toward the front window and looked outside at the gathering crowd. When people stop believing in their police officers, she said softly, everyone loses. The good officers lose the trust they've spent years earning. Families lose their sense of safety. Communities stop working together. That's a price no city should ever have to pay. Nobody interrupted her. Every sentence came from experience rather than anger. Brooks nodded slowly. "I remember your graduation speech." He admitted, "You said, a badge isn't a shield from accountability. It's a promise to the public." Naomi smiled gently. "I still believe that." Outside, someone in the crowd quietly began clapping. Then another person joined. Soon dozens of people applauded, not because they had witnessed someone defeated, but because they had witnessed someone stand for integrity without losing compassion. Several honest officers arriving on later patrols looked at the destruction with visible disappointment. They immediately began helping Emma sweep broken glass, checking on customers, setting overturned chairs upright, and offering statements to document exactly what had happened. No one asked them to help. They simply understood that restoring trust begins with doing the right thing when everyone is watching. Officer Mason finally stepped toward Naomi. For several seconds, he struggled to find the right words. Then he removed his cap. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Not because things went wrong for me, but because we failed the people we were supposed to serve." Naomi looked at him carefully. "The hardest part of becoming a better officer," she replied, "is learning that admitting you're wrong doesn't make you weak. It gives people a reason to trust you again." Those words stayed with every officer standing inside the diner. Lieutenant Brooks instructed Internal Affairs to begin an immediate investigation into the incident and ensured every witness was treated respectfully. The damaged diner would eventually be repaired, but restoring public confidence would require honesty, accountability, and leaders willing to protect both their communities and the integrity of the profession. Over the following weeks, the story spread far beyond the neighborhood. Local newspapers wrote about a retired black woman officer who reminded an entire city what honorable policing truly looked like. Community organizations invited Naomi to speak about leadership, courage, and service. Young recruits at the police academy asked instructors about the woman, whose quiet strength had changed the outcome of a terrible morning without allowing bitterness to define her. Many of those recruits later visited Carter's diner, Not because they wanted to meet a legend, because they wanted to learn from someone who proved that real strength is measured by character long before it is measured by skill. The broken picture frame was repaired and placed back beside the register. Customers often noticed the photograph and asked about the woman wearing the old uniform. Naomi would simply smile and pour another cup of coffee. That was one chapter, she would say. This one matters just as much. The diner slowly became known as more than a restaurant. It became a place where police officers, veterans, teachers, truck drivers, nurses, and families sat together, shared meals, and remembered that respect grows strongest when people choose understanding over fear. Because in the end, the most powerful victory wasn't that one courageous black woman refused to be intimidated. It was that she reminded everyone, including good officers, that a badge earns respect only when it is worn with humility, courage, and integrity, and sometimes the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest voice or the highest rank. Sometimes it's the person who refuses to let hate change who they are. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Naomi Carter's journey stayed with you the most? Do you believe integrity and courage can still inspire positive change in our communities? Share your opinion in the comments, because your perspective may encourage someone else who reads it. And if you'd like the next story to feature another inspiring black woman, an honorable police officer, or a powerful tale of justice, resilience, and hope, let me know in the comments.